You should have never come," Samantha screamed, throwing my plate across the restaurant. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as the remnants of my dinner scattered across the floor. The other diners turned to look, their eyes wide with shock, but I couldn't look away from Samantha's furious face. Her words, sharp and full of venom, cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. You're a burden on this family," she hissed, her words ringing in my ears. I stared at her, my hands trembling, but I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The humiliation burned, but I knew this moment wasn't just about the plate on the floor. It was about everything that had led up to it, everything I had silently endured for so many years. Ryan, my son, sat there, silent. His gaze was fixed on his plate, avoiding mine. This wasn't the first time Samantha had crossed a line, but this was the final straw. I had spent my entire life raising Ryan, caring for him, teaching him, only for him to turn his back on me. To let her treat me like this, with no consequences. My mind raced back to all the times I'd been ignored, belittled, pushed aside. The times when Samantha had made subtle jabs at me, always disguised as jokes, but always leaving a mark. The times when Ryan would stand by her, supporting her every word, never questioning her. And now, here I was, in a public place, humiliated in front of strangers, by the woman I had once welcomed into my family. My heart sank as I thought of all the years I had dedicated to my son and this family, only to be treated like I was invisible. I had done everything for them, every holiday, every family gathering, every birthday, hoping for the same warmth in return. But it was never enough. The warmth had faded long ago, replaced by cold indifference. Samantha's eyes were still on me, daring me to speak, but I remained silent. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. The tears that threatened to fall were not from the hurt of the moment, but from the overwhelming realization that I was no longer welcome in the place I had once called home. My mind flashed to the years I spent raising Ryan, the love I had poured into him, only to have him turn away when he grew up. I had taught him the value of family, of love, of respect, but it seemed that lesson had fallen on deaf ears. As I sat there, with the broken plate at my feet, I realized that I couldn't continue living in this world of rejection. I had to leave. I had to find my own peace. And as I stood up slowly, gathering the strength to walk away from the table, I knew I would never allow myself to be treated this way again. I walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding in my chest. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside me. I tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway, not from the pain of the moment, but from the overwhelming weight of everything that had led up to this. I had given so much of myself to this family, and yet here I was, thrown aside like I was nothing. I could still hear Samantha's words echoing in my mind, calling me a witch, telling me I shouldn't have come. My hands shook as I wiped my face, trying to steady my breath. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. I had spent my entire life being the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who made sure everyone else was happy. But tonight, it felt like everything had come crashing down around me. I thought back to the years I had spent raising Ryan, the love I had poured into him, the sacrifices I had made. And now, after all that, it seemed like he didn't even care. He had sat there, silent, as his wife humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers. I had always hoped that my son would be the one to protect me, to stand by me when I needed him the most. But that hope had been shattered, along with the plate on the floor. Ryan's eyes had avoided mine, as if he couldn't bear to look at me. And that hurt more than anything Samantha had said. He had always been my little boy, the one who crawled into my lap when he was scared. But now, he was a man, and I wasn't sure who he was anymore. I couldn't help but wonder, when did things change? When did I stop being important to him? I remembered the times when we would sit together and talk, the laughter we shared, the bond we had. But somewhere along the way, that bond had faded. Slowly, over the years, Samantha had edged me out of their lives, with her passive-aggressive remarks, her subtle manipulations, and Ryan had let it happen. Maybe he hadn't even realized it, but he had stopped being the son I knew and started being the husband she wanted him to be. I thought about everything Samantha had done, all the time she had made me feel small, unimportant. I had tried to brush it off, to ignore the hurt, but tonight, it was too much. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had spent so many years pretending that everything was fine, that I was happy for them, that I was okay with the way things were. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I wasn't okay with being treated like an outsider in my own family. I wasn't okay with being invisible to the people I had loved and raised. I didn't deserve this. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't deserve this. I had given everything to them, and they had taken it all without a second thought. I stood there for a moment, the weight of it all crashing down on me, before I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I had to make a choice. I had to take control of my own life again. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own life. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living for myself. I woke up the next morning with a sense of numbness that seemed to fill every part of my being. The events of the previous night were still fresh in my mind, but they felt distant, like they had happened to someone else. The restaurant, Samantha's anger, the plate, shattering on the floor. It was all too much to process. I had never imagined things would come to this point. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of me. The house felt emptier than usual, as if every corner had been drained of warmth. I had always tried to maintain peace, to hold the family together, but now, it seemed like I was the one who had been torn apart. My hands trembled slightly as I brought the cup to my lips, the bitterness of the coffee matching the bitterness that had settled in my chest. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being the center of my family to someone who was treated like an afterthought? I thought about Ryan, my son, the boy I had raised with so much love. How had he become this stranger? I remembered the day he was born, the way I had held him in my arms, swaddled in a blanket, and thought to myself that I would do anything for him. I had always been there for him, through every scraped knee, every heartache, and every victory. But now, it seemed like he couldn't even be bothered to look at me, let alone defend me. The thought stung more than I wanted to admit. It was as though I had spent my whole life building a bridge to him, and now, that bridge had crumbled, leaving me stranded. My mind wandered back to the early days of my relationship with Samantha. I had welcomed her into our home with open arms. She was young, bright-eyed, and full of energy. I had hoped that she and Ryan would build a life together, that I would be a part of that life, watching my son grow with the woman he loved. But slowly, over time, things started to change. Samantha became colder, more distant. At first, it was small things, little comments here and there about how I was getting older or how I needed to be more independent. But those comments started to add up, and I began to feel like I was being pushed out, like I didn't belong. Ryan had always defended her, even when I was hurt by the things she said. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself that maybe I was just being too sensitive. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel the distance between us growing, but I didn't know how to fix it. And then, last night, it all came to a head. I had thought that perhaps if I just showed up, if I was just there, things would be okay. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, the family could come together again. But instead, I was humiliated in front of strangers. Samantha had made it clear that I wasn't wanted. The plate had been the symbol of everything that had broken between us. I stared at the empty space where the plate had fallen, and it felt like I could see the cracks in my relationship with Ryan and Samantha. But there was something else too, something stronger than the hurt. It was a sense of clarity, of realization. I had spent too long pretending everything was fine, swallowing my feelings, letting myself be pushed aside. But no more. I couldn't let them treat me like this. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I stood up from the table, a decision forming in my mind. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to wait for them to see me, to treat me with respect. It was time for me to take control of my own life. I didn't know what that would look like, but I knew it had to start now. I had to stop living in the shadows of their lives and start living for myself. I wasn't sure how things would unfold, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this be my life anymore. I was more than what they saw in me, and it was time for me to remind them of that. I spent the next few days in a fog, my thoughts constantly swirling, but never settling. It was as if my mind was on a loop, replaying every moment of that night, every word, every glance, trying to make sense of it all. I kept asking myself the same question. How did we get here? How did the family I had built with so much love turn into this? It wasn't just the incident at the restaurant. It was everything that had happened before, all the little cuts that had added up over the years. I couldn't ignore it anymore, couldn't pretend that I wasn't being pushed to the edge. The silence in the house was deafening, and it was a silence I had grown used to. But now, it felt different. It felt like the calm before the storm. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden, and for a brief moment, I thought back to when it was full of life. Ryan and I had spent hours planting those flowers together. They had been his idea, a way to make the house feel more alive, more welcoming. I had thought that if we took care of this house, if we built it together, it would always be our home. But now, that home felt empty, and so did the life I had built in it. I could hear the faint sounds of footsteps coming from upstairs, the soft creak of floorboards, but I didn't move. I didn't know what to say, or if I should say anything at all. What was there left to say? I had tried for so long to make things work, to keep the peace, but all I had done was allow myself to be walked on. And the worst part was that Ryan, my son, the one I had raised, the one I had loved, was no longer the person I thought he was. I wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, he had become just as distant as Samantha. It wasn't even about the house or the money, although I knew that it played a part in it. It was about respect. It was about being seen, being valued. And right now, I felt like I was invisible. The quiet in the house was starting to feel oppressive, like the walls were closing in around me. I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to do something, to break the silence that had become my prison. That's when I decided to confront Ryan. I had been putting it off, afraid of what I might say, or how he might react. But I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I needed to hear it from him, to know once and for all where I stood in his life. I waited until he came downstairs, and then I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to sit together as a family, talking, laughing. The same table that had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Ryan walked in, his eyes avoiding mine, just like they always did now. He was holding a mug of coffee, but he didn't offer me any, just like he hadn't offered me anything in so long. I took a deep breath and said, "Ryan, we need to talk." He paused, setting the mug down on the counter, and finally looked at me. There was something in his eyes, but it wasn't the warmth I used to see. It was a mix of guilt and confusion, like he didn't know how to handle the situation. "What about?" he asked, his voice distant. "I want to know what happened to us," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to know why you've been avoiding me, why you let Samantha treat me like this. I've given everything to you, Ryan, and I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." His face hardened, and for a moment, I thought he might say something to defend himself, but then he just sighed and looked away. "I don't know, Mom," he said quietly. "I don't know what you want me to say." His words were like a punch to the gut. I had been hoping for something more, some explanation, some hint that he still cared. But all I got was indifference. "You've changed, Ryan," I said, my voice breaking. "You've changed, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. And in that moment, I realized that there was no going back. There was no fixing what had been broken. All I could do now was move forward, but I didn't know where that would take me. I only knew that I couldn't keep living in the past, clinging to a family that no longer existed. I spent the next few days in a haze, walking around the house like a ghost. The silence was oppressive, each room echoing with memories of better times. I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the old family photos that lined the walls. They seemed so distant now, like a life that belonged to someone else. I had done everything for them. I had given my time, my love, my care, and this is how they repaid me. My mind kept drifting back to that moment at the restaurant. The shattered plate, Samantha's cruel words, and Ryan's refusal to stand up for me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had spent so many years sacrificing for their happiness, yet it seemed like they didn't even notice. As I sat there, lost in thought, the doorbell rang, pulling me out of my reverie. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Ellie standing on the doorstep, her small figure looking uncertain. She had been quiet lately, but there was something in her eyes that made me pause. "Grandma," she asked softly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside and let her in. Ellie was my granddaughter, and while I knew she loved me, she had always been close to her parents. But today, there was a look of understanding in her eyes, something that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, not all hope was lost. She sat down beside me on the couch, and for a moment, Neither of us said anything. The silence between us was comfortable, not like the heavy silence that had filled the house in the days since the restaurant incident. After a long pause, Ellie finally spoke. I saw what happened at the restaurant. Her voice was small, but there was a quiet strength behind it. I don't think it was fair, Grandma. You don't deserve to be treated like that. Her words were simple, but they hit me like a wave. I had spent so long trying to avoid confronting the truth, trying to make excuses for the way Samantha and Ryan treated me. But hearing Ellie's honest words made something inside me snap. I had been a fool to keep letting them hurt me, to keep allowing myself to be ignored and discarded. I had spent so many years trying to be the peacekeeper, trying to make everything work for everyone else. But at what cost? Ellie's presence was a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone had forgotten me. Thank you, Ellie, I said softly, my voice trembling. It means more than you know. Ellie gave me a small smile, her young face full of sincerity. You're my grandma. I love you. In that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about what Samantha and Ryan had done to me. It was about what I had done to myself. I had allowed myself to be the martyr, to take on the burden of everyone else's happiness while sacrificing my own. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace, trying to be the good mother, the good mother-in-law, the good grandmother, that I had lost sight of who I was. I had to change. I had to take control of my own life again. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my family, hoping that they would come around, hoping that they would see me. I had to start living for myself. I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I knew it had to start with me. I had spent too long pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. And now, it was time to take a stand. I wasn't going to let Samantha and Ryan push me around any longer. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life. I was more than just a caregiver, more than just a grandmother or mother. I was a person with my own needs, my own desires, and my own life to live. And it was time to start living it. Ellie's presence reminded me of that. She was the future. And maybe, just maybe, I still had a role to play in that future. But first, I needed to find my own path, separate from the family I had spent so long trying to keep together. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the strength to face them. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small anymore. It had been a week since I made the decision to stop living in the shadows. I was still adjusting to the idea of putting myself first, but there was something freeing about it, something empowering that I hadn't felt in years. The house still felt empty, but in a way, it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. I had started spending more time outside, walking through the park, doing simple things that brought me peace. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to rush back to a home that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. My mornings were quiet. Now, filled with simple rituals that grounded me. I took my time with breakfast, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, not rushing to clean up after every meal, not worrying about what needed to be done next. I let myself just be. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. The phone calls from Ryan had slowed down, but he still tried to reach out. I couldn't bring myself to answer, not yet. I wasn't ready for the same empty conversations where he would apologize, but it wouldn't change anything. I wasn't sure if I was angry with him or just disappointed. Maybe a little bit of both. He had become a stranger to me, someone I didn't recognize anymore. The years of building a family together seemed to have faded away with the click of a door closing. I had always thought that as a mother, I would be there for him no matter what. But now, I realized that sometimes, you have to let go, even if it hurts. I didn't want to let go. I didn't want to sever ties with my son, but I knew I had to for my own peace. I couldn't keep trying to hold on to something that was no longer there. It was better to step back and give him the space he needed to find his own way. It was hard, harder than I had expected, but I had learned over the years that pain, though difficult, is something you can survive. And sometimes, pain is the catalyst for growth. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, I received a text from Ellie. "Grandma, I was thinking about you today. How are you?" I smiled to myself. Her words a reminder that not everything was lost. At least one person in the family still cared. I replied, "I'm doing okay, Ellie. Thank you for checking in. I'm just trying to figure things out." I hadn't realized how much I had missed her until that moment. She was the light in the dark, the only one who had shown me that not all of them had forgotten me. I promised myself that I would stay in touch with her, that I would be the person she could come to, just as I had always hoped to be. Later that evening, I found myself walking to the mailbox, the cool breeze of the fall evening brushing against my face. It felt good to be outside, away from the house, away from the memories. I had started to take long walks every evening, just to clear my mind. The mailbox was small and simple, just like the neighborhood I had lived in for years. I opened it and found a letter from Ryan. For a moment, I just stared at it, unsure of what to do. It wasn't like him to send a letter. He usually just called. I took a deep breath, opened it, and began to read. Mom, I know I've hurt you, and I know I haven't been there for you like I should have. I've been so caught up in my own life, in my own world, that I didn't see how much I was pushing you away. I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try. I'm sorry. I read it again, the words heavy in my hands. It wasn't much, but it was something. It wasn't an apology I had been waiting for, but it was a step in the right direction. I didn't know what to make of it, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that same sting of rejection. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. I didn't respond to the letter immediately. I needed time to process it. I wasn't ready to forgive him just yet, but I wasn't ready to close the door on him, either. I had spent so many years putting everyone else first, but now, for the first time, I had to make the decision that was right for me. I had to decide what kind of life I wanted to lead from here on out. And I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own son, take that away from me. It had been a few weeks since I had read Ryan's letter, and the weight of it still lingered in my mind. I hadn't responded yet, unsure of what to say or even if I was ready to face him. But something had shifted within me. I couldn't keep running away from the truth, from the reality of what had happened. I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to hold everything together, but I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't be the glue that held a family together when they didn't even care to hold me. But that letter, those words from Ryan, left me with a sense of uncertainty. I didn't know if it was too little too late, or if it was just the start of something that could lead to healing. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he still cared, that he hadn't completely shut me out. But another part of me couldn't forget the years of silence, the years of being ignored, pushed aside, and left out of the family I had built. It wasn't easy to trust again, especially after everything that had happened. I spent days mulling over my feelings, trying to figure out what was best for me. I wasn't sure I could ever go back to the way things were, even if Ryan was willing to try. The damage had been done, and it wasn't something that could be fixed with a few words on paper. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. But I couldn't just cut him out of my life either. He was my son, and no matter what had happened, I still loved him. I took another walk that evening, the cool breeze brushing against my face. The air felt fresh, invigorating. It was something I had come to cherish in the past few weeks, these small moments of peace, of solitude. I didn't need to be around anyone else to feel complete. I could stand on my own 2 feet, and for the first time in a long time, I felt strong enough to do so. As I walked through the neighborhood, I passed by the old family house, the one I had once called home. It looked the same, yet it felt different. The memories were still there, etched into the walls, into the yard, but the warmth had long since faded. The house no longer felt like mine. It was just a place, a structure that held the remnants of a life I had once known. I stopped for a moment, letting the silence envelop me. It was almost peaceful, the stillness of the night, the quiet of the street. But then, I heard footsteps behind me, soft and tentative. I turned to see Ellie walking toward me, her face lit up by the streetlight. She was holding something in her hand, a small piece of paper. "Grandma," she said softly, her voice full of concern. "I found this at the house." She handed me the paper, and I saw it was another letter. This time, it was from Samantha. I unfolded it slowly, almost afraid to read the words. But as I began to read, I was struck by the apology. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me stop and think. "I'm sorry, Margaret," the letter read. "I know I've treated you horribly. I've let my own insecurities cloud my judgment, and I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. I regret the way things have turned out, and I hope one day you can forgive me." I stood there for a long moment, the letter in my hands, my mind racing. Samantha's words were unexpected, a stark contrast to the woman who had thrown the plate at me just weeks ago. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a small step toward reconciliation. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her. I wasn't sure if I even could. But I knew that this letter, this gesture, was something that could begin to heal the wounds. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Ellie stood beside me, her eyes filled with understanding. "Do you think things will get better, Grandma?" she asked softly. I didn't have an answer right away, but I knew one thing: it wouldn't be easy. It would take time, but I was willing to try. For myself, for the family I once had, for the future I wanted to build. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I had Ellie by my side, and that gave me the strength to keep moving forward. As the days passed, I began to realize that healing wasn't as simple as accepting apologies or waiting for time to fix things. It was a process, a journey that I would have to walk alone. The letter from Samantha had caught me off guard, and while it wasn't enough to erase the pain, it was a start, a small crack in the wall I had built around myself. I didn't know if I was ready to embrace forgiveness yet, but I knew that I couldn't keep holding on to the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. I had spent years allowing myself to be trapped in a cycle of hurt, but now, something inside me was shifting. I was changing. I had to be. I couldn't keep waiting for others to fix things for me. I couldn't wait for Ryan or Samantha to see the hurt they had caused. They might never understand. They might never truly see me. But that didn't matter anymore. I wasn't living for their approval. I was living for myself. Ellie's visits became a bright spot in my days. She would come over after school, sometimes just to sit with me, sometimes to bring me small drawings she had made. It was a simple, quiet kind of love, but it meant everything to me. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so connected to someone, so unconditionally loved. It was her presence that reminded me that not everything had been lost. There were still good things, small things, that could fill the spaces left by the absence of the family I had once known. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, Ellie asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Grandma," she said, "do you think we'll ever be a family again? Do you think things will ever go back to the way they were?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. How could I promise her something that I wasn't sure I could promise myself? I looked at Ellie, her eyes full of hope, and I realized that I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't need to know if things would go back to the way they were. I didn't need to hope for things to be the same. What mattered now was what I was going to do with the life I had left. It was my choice, my decision, and I was starting to see that I could still make something beautiful out of it, even if it wasn't the life I had imagined. "I don't know, Ellie," I said slowly, my voice soft. "I don't know if things will ever be the same, but I know that I'm okay with that. I'm okay with who I am now, and I'm not going to keep waiting for people to come back to me." Ellie didn't say anything for a long while, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to be me, and that was enough. The days that followed were quieter, but there was a calmness to them that I hadn't known in years. I started to do things for myself, small things, like taking longer walks in the morning, reading books I had forgotten about, and even starting to write in a journal again. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was living for myself, not for anyone else's expectations. I wasn't waiting for my son or daughter-in-law to change. I wasn't waiting for them to come back and fix things. I was fixing things for myself. One evening, as I sat in the garden with a cup of tea, I realized that I hadn't thought about the hurt in days. It wasn't that I had forgotten, but it no longer had a hold on me. The anger, the resentment, they had started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had stopped looking for validation from others. I had stopped needing them to acknowledge my worth. I had found that worth on my own. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward, about choosing to live in a way that honored who I was, not who I used to be. And as I sat there, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, for what I could build next, for the kind of life I could create on my own terms. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. As the weeks went by, I started to notice something different in myself. A quiet strength had begun to grow, something I hadn't realized I was capable of. I was still healing, still learning how to live for myself. But the weight of the past no longer felt like a burden I carried every day. It had become a part of me, a part of my journey, but it didn't define me anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all to Ryan or Samantha. They had their own lives to lead, and I had mine. I wasn't waiting for them to come back to me. and I wasn't holding on to the hope that things would somehow magically fix themselves. I had learned to accept that life doesn't always go the way we expect it to, and sometimes, the most important thing is to let go and move forward. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting in the park, watching the children play. Ellie had invited me to watch one of her soccer games, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She had grown so much, and I had been there to see it all. She had become a bright, kind young girl, someone I was proud to know. As I watched her run across the field, her face lit up with a smile as she scored a goal. I felt something shift inside me. I realized that despite everything that had happened, despite the pain, there was still so much to be thankful for. Ellie was still here. She still cared, and I still had a role to play in her life. That was all I needed to keep moving forward. After the game, Ellie ran over to me, her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see that, Grandma?" she asked, breathless. "I scored a goal." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "I saw, sweetheart. You were amazing out there." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I felt like everything was right in the world. It wasn't the family I had once known, but it was enough. It was my family now, the one I had chosen to build in the midst of everything that had happened. As we walked back to the car, I realized that I had let go of the need for closure, for things to be fixed. Sometimes, the broken pieces don't need to be put back together in the same way. They can create something new, something stronger. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was creating a new life for myself, one that wasn't based on the past or the mistakes of others. I was finding peace within myself, not from the approval of my son or daughter-in-law. It was a quiet kind of strength. Weren't perfect, and I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. I felt free, and that was enough. That was all I needed. In this emotional journey, the older woman, a mother and grandmother, finds herself navigating the pain of betrayal by her son and daughter-in-law. The family stories that have been built over the years seem to crumble before her eyes, leaving her in a state of confusion and sorrow. As she faces the harsh reality of being ignored and cast aside, the woman takes time to reflect on her life, realizing that she deserves more than the treatment she has received. Her journey unfolds as she slowly begins to reclaim her own life, choosing to step away from the toxic family dynamics that have defined her existence for too long. Alongside her granddaughter, the woman finds moments of solace and unconditional love, reminding her that not all family stories are filled with hurt and abandonment. As she continues to heal, she discovers a quiet strength that was always within her, and it becomes clear that her story, too, is worth telling. Through her emotional evolution, she learns that while family stories may be full of pain, they can also lead to growth, self-discovery, and peace. The family stories that once defined her now serve as a reminder of how far she has come, and with each day, she becomes more empowered to live for herself, leaving behind the old wounds and embracing a future filled with hope. Create a realistic portrait of a white woman aged around 65. She has a warm but tired expression. She wears a comfortable yet modest outfit. The angle is a direct frontal view. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Create a realistic portrait of a white young girl aged around 10. She has bright eyes and a cheerful expression. She wears a casual sports outfit. The angle is a direct frontal view. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. 1. The scene opens with a tense confrontation at a family gathering. The older woman, first character, stands in the middle of a crowded room, her face a mix of shock and disbelief as her daughter-in-law, second character, throws a plate across the table, shouting at her. The room is silent, all eyes on them. The older woman doesn't move, her expression unreadable. Her son, standing by his wife's side, avoids her gaze. The tension is palpable, a dramatic moment of betrayal and humiliation. The younger woman's anger is raw, while the older woman's strength is silent but intense. This scene marks the beginning of a fierce emotional battle between them, setting the tone for the conflict that will unfold. 2. In the next scene, we see the older woman at home, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The room is quiet and peaceful, with the soft morning light filtering through the window. She looks out the window, lost in thought, as she reflects on the events that have unfolded. Her face is tired but resolute, showing the years of love and sacrifice for her family. The camera lingers on her hands as she gently folds a napkin, her movements slow but deliberate. This scene contrasts with the tension of the previous one, giving the audience a glimpse into her life and emotional state, highlighting her quiet strength. 3. The scene shifts to the younger woman, the daughter-in-law, in a bright and modern home. She's getting ready for the day, putting on a stylish outfit, checking her phone with a look of impatience. The atmosphere around her is cold and sterile, and her movements are quick, almost rehearsed. She looks into the mirror, adjusting her makeup with precision, her face hardening as she checks her messages. This is her world, controlled, calculated, and always focused on her image. The camera focuses on her reflection as she prepares to face the day, a woman determined to maintain control, regardless of the consequences. 4. In a shared scene, the older woman and her daughter-in-law stand face to face in the living room, a space filled with memories. The tension between them is thick as they exchange harsh words. The younger woman is defensive, her posture rigid, while the older woman stands her ground, her eyes filled with years of unspoken pain. There's an air of finality in their confrontation, as if this is the moment everything changes. In the background, her son watches silently, the weight of his silence amplifying the tension. The camera cuts between their faces, capturing the coldness in the younger woman's eyes and the quiet strength in the older woman's gaze. The scene is charged with emotional power, both women unwilling to back down. 5. A quieter moment follows, showing the older woman in the park, walking slowly along a path lined with trees. She pauses to sit on a bench, her face softening as she watches a child play nearby. This peaceful moment provides a brief contrast to the intense emotions of the previous scenes, offering the older woman a moment of reflection. The camera lingers on her face as she takes a deep breath, the weight of her decisions hanging in the air. This moment represents a turning point, where she begins to accept her own strength and independence, moving toward a life of self-discovery and healing. 6. The final scene is a culmination of the older woman's journey. She stands in her garden, surrounded by the flowers she and her son once planted together. The camera pans out as she takes a deep breath, her face calm and content. She has made her peace with the past, no longer waiting for anyone's approval. The sun sets in the background, casting a warm glow over the scene. As the camera slowly fades to black, we see her silhouette, standing strong and alone, finally free to live for herself. The story ends on a note of quiet strength and hope for the future.